Hello, everyone. Hello. Hello, hello. Welcome to this live today, all about how to learn and remember English vocabulary. And I'm going to share with you how my opinion has changed a lot on this over the years as an English teacher and a language learner myself. So, welcome if you're joining live or watching this later as a recording. I would love to hear in the comments any questions you have or any comments you have about learning vocabulary in English. How have you been getting on with that? Do you have any challenges with that, or even any tips that you'd like to share with everyone else, with me and with the other learners? So, without further ado, I have 3 points in this video, and let me just go through it. I have my Kindle, as always, to look at my notes. Oh, and hello, David. Thank you for joining live. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate to put them in the comments. So yeah, maybe I can first, just before I get into the points, yeah, I would say that my opinion has changed on this a lot. Before, I would say that in terms of improving your English and learning vocabulary, it was much more school-based approach, much more, just learn this off by heart. You need to practice learning and memorizing and spending, 5 to 10 minutes a day, just um, really being motivated to practice and to review the language like that. It mightn't be the most interesting way of learning, but it's important that you memorize and you learn by heart this vocabulary. So that used to be my opinion, but it has changed a lot. I think just from experience, and also I have some favorite polyglots that I have followed, especially on YouTube. Two of them that I like uh, in particular are Steve Kaufman. He is a Canadian ex-diplomat, and I think, he's in his 60s, and he's learned maybe 10 languages or something like that, and he's learned a lot of languages from the age of 60. So he's a great inspiration, especially for older language learners, and he has a very particular method, but in a nutshell, it's much more about, enjoying the language, listening a lot, reading a lot, to expose yourself to a lot of vocabulary and language. So that's him. And then there's also Zoe Languages. She's a Chinese polyglot based in Germany, used to live in France. And I find her really inspirational and motivating. So those two definitely have changed my opinion on how to improve your vocabulary, how to learn. And I would say you can definitely do it in a much more enjoyable way than just learning by heart some vocabulary with flashcards, and a much more effective way as well. That will be much more in your long-term memory. So I'm going to get into that now and explain my opinion and what I suggest to you learning vocabulary. So the first thing is, what do you do when you encounter new vocabulary? When you encounter new vocabulary in English? So I'm assuming here, as you're watching this video, that you're at least an A2, that you understand most of what I'm saying, that you're at least an intermediate, high pre-intermediate level in English. So yeah, these tips are all for that, not really for beginner level. But I think the most important thing is to approach learning a language with a positive mindset, a positive mentality, and curiosity. And Steve Kaufman, as I mentioned him just a moment ago, the polyglot, he talks about, and I think this comes from a university in the US, there are three main components that are important for learning a language. The first is that you have a good attitude, as I said, a good positive mentality. The second one is that you spend a lot of time with the language. You spend enough time reading and listening to the language, preferably on a daily basis, so very consistently. And the third thing is that you have this ability to notice. So that comes in with curiosity. You are observing all the time the kind of things that are coming up in the language naturally. As you read and listen, you're saying, oh, what is this word? Or why is it like this? Why is the grammar like that? So you have that natural curiosity for the language and also a positive mentality and attitude. And those things are really important in keeping you focused and interested. I think it's very, very easy to listen, to watch something, to come across a new word or expression and to think, I'm never going to be able to use it. I'm never going to be able to, first of all, remember this word again. And second of all, I'm never going to be able to use it. And I have myself been in this position for a long time learning French that, yes, I will come across something that I'm listening to or reading, but I have this negative frame of mind, negative mentality that I'm just never going to be able to remember it and use it when I communicate in my chosen language, French. So, yeah, that's really, really important that you're open and positive about it. And I'm going to give you some techniques of how you can remember things without spending any extra time, even. I'm going to tell you a little story about that without even spending extra time going over flashcards, creating, big lists of vocabulary that you need to learn by heart. No, none of that. You can there are ways and methods that you can do it in a very fun and effective, efficient way. So I will get onto that in a moment. But the other thing as well, I think that's important to remember in this first part about what you do when you encounter new vocabulary. Just remember how do babies learn when they learn their first mother tongue? They're listening a lot to their parents and to the people around them. And that's what we should be doing when we're learning a language. We're going to be listening more at the beginning than speaking, and we're always going to have more input than output. That means that we're always going to actually have a higher level of comprehension as well. We're going to hear lots of vocabulary that we may not necessarily ever use, and that's okay. That's perfectly normal. I think it's the same in our native language. There is vocabulary, expression, words that we come across when we listen to the TV or whatever, the radio, and we would never use that just because of who we are and what is important to us. So I think that also that's an important part about when you come across the vocabulary, think of yourself of a baby taking in this language, and it's going to come out naturally over time if you are just open to it, if you relax and not too stressed about needing to produce the language straight away. It will get easier, I promise. So the second point is about how to categorize and organize vocabulary. Now, I think it is very important, this point about categorizing and organizing vocabulary, but not in the same way that I imagined in the past that you need to, put everything on an Excel spreadsheet, you need to create flashcards. I think what's helpful is to have this idea of a language toolbox that you can draw from. So I got this idea from one of the polyglots, like a box, a toolbox of all your tools, all of the different things that you have at your disposal. And your learning and your, organizing of this vocabulary and the language, it can be messy and it can be disorganized. And I think as well that's actually perfectly normal and good, because if you are trying to have a system of organization of your vocabulary that's perfect, that looks really good, that's really perfect, I think that's hard to achieve. And what we end up doing is we don't get round to it. We don't actually do the thing. We don't actually organize our vocabulary because there's this perfect way of doing it, like putting it in the Excel and creating these flashcards. There is no perfect way of learning a language. It's very, very personal. Everyone has their own way. And I think the main thing is that we're making progress and we're staying consistent with the language. So we're doing a little bit every day with it. And, we don't always need to do anything. We don't need to write it up and spend time learning things by heart. Something as well that I've heard, and I think this is an interesting thing because, yeah, well, I've heard this about sales and business. So with business, when I've been promoting my services, I heard that in sales, a customer needs to hear the same, let's say, advertisement or the same promotion or offer 7 times before they consider buying your product. So that's what I heard. So that gave me peace of mind in terms of like when I was promoting my offer. But the same thing I've heard for language learning. Actually, you need to have to be exposed and to listen to the same piece of vocabulary 7 times before it goes in and it starts to become part of you, and you start to become comfortable to use that expression and piece of vocabulary. So think about that. The first time you encounter piece of vocabulary, don't expect yourself to magically be able to use it tomorrow or, the next in your next meeting. Try to again have that openness and curiosity and observation and say, okay, that piece of vocabulary, that's interesting. Do I understand what it means? Is it going to come up again? And also, the great thing about waiting and listening for that piece of vocabulary, observing and waiting for it to come up again in another context, is that the more you hear the same piece of vocabulary a number of times, the more that you realize it's actually a useful one to know, that it's a very very common piece of vocabulary, because there's a lot of things that you might read in the news, listen on the radio, that are not always useful. And that's the thing as well. You need to be selective with the vocabulary you decide to learn and to integrate into your own communication, because not all vocabulary is useful or used in English. So that's an important point. So let me just look at my notes because I want to make sure I say everything. Yeah, so in terms of the systems, I've kind of given you a bit of context there, but I would say there, as I said, there's no perfect system, but you could definitely use Excel. I think there's a lot of benefits for having it digitally because you can access it usually on your different devices, your smartphone, your computer, it's all linked up. And if you forget your notebook, if you're doing it in a pen and paper way, yeah, so it's much more what's the word, reliable, I suppose, online. But then again, when you do a pen and paper writing in a notebook method, that's meant to be very good for your brain when you're writing things down. There is something there about helping your memories when you do it pen and paper. So I think both have their advantages and disadvantages, whether you want to do writing the vocabulary in Excel or in your notebook. I always suggest for my students to write the English, so the piece of vocabulary, the meaning in your first language, or if you're more advanced, especially if you're upper intermediate advanced in English, to write a synonym in English, and then to write an example sentence. That's really important to see it in context. You can use the Cambridge Dictionary to find some example sentences. I would recommend that source especially. And another thing is important that you decide, not decide, but you see when you look at that piece of vocabulary, you realize what type of word or what type of um, expression or what is it exactly. So if we take the word to get, to get, get is used a lot in English. To get on its own, it can mean different things, but we have to get on with someone, and that's a phrasal verb which means to have a good relationship with someone. So it's very important that when you're seeing this piece of vocabulary that you're writing the full version of it. So to get on with someone, you need all of these parts for it to make sense. It's not enough to just write to get. Yeah, so just looking at whether it's a verb, whether it's an adjective, a noun. I think in this video, I can't really go into detail on all these parts of the language, but I think it could be a good future video if you're interested in hearing, let me know. But also phrasal verbs are very, very common in English. And I gave you an example there, to get on with someone. So to get is the verb, on is the preposition. So it's usually a preposition or particle. And together the verb and the preposition make up a phrasal verb that is an expression in English that is very common and can be quite confusing because it's not always clear about from the meaning. It's not always clear the meaning from the word. You just have to know from the context. So it's important, yeah, to write down the full form of the word or the expression that you're learning. I would recommend that. So that's an important part for categorizing and organizing vocabulary. The last thing I want to say in this point about categorizing, organizing vocabulary is the memorization part. And remember, I was saying about how, when you see a new piece of vocabulary and you look at it, you might have a negative mentality about, oh, I'm never going to be able to remember this word. It's just too difficult, and I'm going to have to go and tomorrow I'm going to have to go and sit down and learn all of these vocabulary by heart, spend half an hour learning a list of vocabulary by heart. Well, what I would recommend, there are two things I would recommend in terms of memorization. The first is called, and this is a bit lesser known, but it's something I've come across recently. It's the idea of having a memory palace. Now, I think you should go and Google that if you're interested because it's difficult for me to explain, but it's basically associating words, getting really playful and fun with associating words with something that you already know. And so I remember I did this in terms of the word, a French word in a series I watched recently. It was le chantage, which is bribery, I think, because I still remember this word because I did this memory palace exercise. So le chantage, and then you have the word chanter in French, and I already knew the word chanter, which is to sing. So I imagined bribery with the word with someone singing because I knew this similar word, this similar verb, chanter, which meant to sing, and I linked it with the idea of bribery so that I could remember it better. And I actually really stuck. I haven't done this a lot, but I think you could do this very easily. So linking either, another word in English or a word in your mother tongue that sounds like that word and creating a visual memory in your mind about this. And you can just then in that way learn words immediately without, needing to later on try to memorize things, but try to immediately make an association when you come across that word. It's really powerful, and I'd love to do it more and more and to maybe see how it works, see if it really works for lots of different vocabulary. But definitely give it a try. The idea of this memory palace, it's much more complicated than what I've just explained. It's about putting all of these words in different parts of your mental house, something like that. But I think basically being very playful with the language, like you're a child and trying to, see the similarities with what you already know. I think that's the general idea. So yeah, that's one memorization I would recommend. The other one is spaced repetition, and this is to do with using often flashcards when and it's the idea of looking at something for one day and then coming back the next day and revising it again. And the kind of weaker links, the vocabulary that you didn't know the first day, it comes up again, and then you review it after a few days, after a few weeks, after a few months, and it's very effective. It's an evidence-based, scientifically proven method, and it's used a lot in technology now, software that is available for language learning. So the two platforms I would recommend are Quizlet and Anki. They both have flashcards that you can make. You can export your Excel file and generate flashcards like that automatically. And also many learning apps like Duolingo, they use this method as well with flashcards. So previously, my opinion on language learning was very much this, like getting my students to put everything in Excel and then create some flashcards and then just spend time memorizing and or not memorizing, but like going over the flashcards. I still think it's a really good way, but it's not the only way, and it can be a bit long and like this kind of perfect system that not everyone ends up doing or wants to do, and that includes me. done a bit for French, but I've never really kept it up. I've never kept up, going to my app, my flashcard app, and looking at words. I think it might be more useful for lower levels when you have to really learn certain things like irregular verbs that can be useful. But for higher levels, I think there are other ways, much more enjoyable ways, which are, I think, as I explained, the input method of listening and reading a lot and taking in that vocabulary. So there you go. That's my point number two about categorizing, organizing vocabulary, how to memorize it as well. And, yeah, it's like it's a topic I think I can talk a lot about. I mean, I thought this live would be 10 minutes, but, it's, yeah, 20 minutes. Okay, I can hopefully keep it to 30 minutes. So let's see, I'm just looking at number 3. Okay, number 3 is how to integrate new vocabulary into your communication. So this is the final part, this vocabulary that you're trying to learn, the end point or the main thing you want to achieve with this is being able to communicate, having more words in English to express yourself, to express your ideas. So yeah, it's a really important part. And what I would say are two things. The first thing you can do is if you are preparing for a particular meeting, a particular networking event, maybe a presentation, a meeting, I would choose 3 to 5 different expressions or vocabulary as a kind of an anchor, as a kind of base for this meeting that you can use in English. And no more than this. So 3 to 5. So that would be, something that you can easily note down ahead of time. You could have it in your notes, but it's a way for you to begin points or parts of this situation. It could be introducing yourself, it could be introducing an idea, or giving your opinion, that you have an expression or two to help you along, and it's just kind of to guide you a bit, but not getting too obsessed with having like 20 expressions or something. So yeah, I would say that. So if you have a particular professional situation, having a few expressions to really just as a base to anchor you. The second thing is, what is that song from Frozen? Let it go. Let it go. I would say also let it flow. So relaxing and letting the language come to you. I know it's easier said than done, but really having that confidence and positive mindset, positive mentality to be safe in the knowledge that you have enough vocabulary. And if you don't have that word or you can't remember that word, you can always paraphrase, you can always find a different way to say the same thing, but trying to relax and let the language come to you. And unless this is an exam, the goal for you is to communicate, not to use exact vocabulary. So each time you speak and communicate, it's going to get easier. And especially if you're doing similar situations, you're going to the vocabulary will come to you faster. It will definitely get easier. Another thing as well is to observe people around you, observe the native speakers or the other people who are speaking English, and just looking at or listening to what they're saying and thinking of how you can integrate it into your next communication. So, yeah, I think that is all. I'm just thinking, is there anything else I want to share? Um, yeah, so the tools that I mentioned were for the flashcards, Quizlet and Anki, I would really recommend. The two polyglots, I'm going to link that too. The other thing, oh yeah, Cambridge Dictionary, really recommend that for just looking at the meaning, the example sentences, and also I would highly recommend Youglish. So in a way of, trying to encounter that language in different contexts, waiting for those 7 times to hear the same vocabulary, you could maybe speed up the process and use Youglish, which is a platform connected to YouTube. And you put in, let's say, get on with someone, You put that into Youglish, and what pops up are different videos that they, I don't know, AI, they use this to generate different videos with that example expression or vocabulary. So you can see it used in context. So that's really great. It's a really great tool. So I think I'll include that, the polyglots, the memorization tools, and also those ones that I'm talking about, putting things in context. So thank you for joining me today in this live video. It was really nice to share all of that with you. As we come into the summer, it is a great time for a lot of us to refocus our to refocus ourselves on learning that language, on improving our communication skills. So it's something, I am looking for a few clients who would be open to joining me for my intensive 3-month program, the Fluent English Lawyer Accelerator. So if you are interested, you can definitely look at my services on my website, and I'd be very happy to talk to you if you had any questions. Yeah, of course, David, I'm very happy that you joined with me, and do get in touch if you have any questions. I hope it helps. Okay, have a great day, everyone. Have a great week, and I'll talk to you next week for another live. I will let you know more details soon.